Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Many Albertans have been asking the same question: where is Premier Jason Kenney? He explained where he has been during a recent Facebook Live event. A new survey out from the Alberta Chambers of Commerce is explaining how business owners feel about potential vaccine passports. And Whoop Up Days has begun in Lethbridge. We will explain what you can expect at this summer's festival.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Many people have been wondering where Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has been the past couple of months. Some political pundits believe our Premier is lying low as to not give Liberal leader Justin Trudeau any ammunition during the federal election campaign. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says that could be quite strategic, but he says it doesn't explain why we haven't heard from Health Minister Tyler Shandro or Dr. Deena Hinshaw as COVID-19 case counts have increased in our province.
A good guess is that they are laying low so as to, not interfere in the election at all. But that perhaps a couple people I've talked to say, that doesn't explain why Tyler Shandro couldn't come out. That doesn't explain why Deena Hinshaw could come out, even if Premier Kenney is trying to lay low. So very strange situation, and a lot of political hay being made from it. But, I think the basic question for the rest of us, is we can see the numbers, but what's the government actually doing, if anything?
Political reporter Tyler Dawson will also discuss why former Wildrose Party leader Brian Jean has been so active on social media recently. That Q&A is coming up later in our broadcast. Premier Jason Kenney did a Facebook Live from his office in Calgary on Wednesday evening to explain where he's been the last little while.
I'm right here at McDougall Centre. I've been working out of this office this week. I did take a couple of weeks of summer holiday. Don't normally do that. In fact, I think this was the second time, since about 2015, I've taken a break like that, apart from a few days here and there in between. And I, it's important that a person in my position doesn't burn out, has a chance to recharge my batteries. I can tell you I was in touch with my office, with senior ministers, with senior officials in the public service on a daily basis, spent a fair bit of my summer break time on the phone and on my computer, and had regular briefings on the COVID-19 situation and on other pressing issues. In fact, spent much of the past couple of days here in further briefings about the COVID situation. There will be, I believe, a news conference later this week about the current situation, about which we are concerned, and rightfully so.
The federal NDP has named their candidate for Medicine at Cardston Warner. Jocelyn Stinger will be running in the federal election on September the 20th. She's currently working as the Alberta representative for the Canadian Labour Congress. Stinger says she's very passionate about putting more power into the hands of working people and those who are marginalized to have opportunities to succeed and build healthy communities.
It's easy to say we're going to give you some tax credits over here, or we're going to implement some policy, but how that actually plays out on the ground is so different. You can provide income support for folks, but they've got to qualify. They've got to fill out a bunch of paperwork. They've got to get their kids to that office on public transit. They've got to be able to pay for that public transit. So I think it's just the more you're exposed and working directly with your community and people, the more you can actually see where those gaps are.
The leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, says he is promising to tax the ultra-rich should his party get elected. Ben Christensen has thrown his hat into the ring, vying for a spot in Lethbridge City Council next month. Christensen says he's unhappy with the current direction the council has taken. He says he has three main platforms that he'll be campaigning on in the upcoming election.
The first, obviously, to address homelessness and the opioid crisis in our community. Those sort of go hand in hand with each other. I also have a focus on compassionate care for persons with mental health issues. I'd like to see an improvement in access to resources for people who have those issues in our community. Crime reduction also ties in with those issues as well. So dealing with the complex social issues that we've been faced with in our community. And then the other focus has been with reopening the business community in our city post-COVID, looking for ways to help small businesses who have suffered losses over the past 2 to 3 years because of COVID.
The Birds of Prey Centre is closing for the season on September the 6th. Now, a few of the newest additions to the centre are little snowy owls. Snowy owls breed on the Arctic tundra and make stops in the prairies during the winter months. Staff of the centre say the snowy owls were hatched in captivity.
They are bigger owls as well, so since they spend a lot of time in the cold, they're usually quite a bit heavier than a lot of the other owls, and they have many, many feathers around them. So around their talons, the feathers go all the way down to keep them warm, and they have quite a bit of weight to them just so that they can be warm. So they'll be down around southern Alberta in the winter time, and then during the summertime they're going to go back up farther north, and that's usually where they're going to nest and breed there.
Staff at the Birds of Prey Centre in Lethbridge will continue to release injured and orphaned owls during the off-season. Whoop Up Days 2021 has officially kicked off at Exhibition Park here in Lethbridge. Now, this year's festivities include the food trucks, live entertainment, and 25 rides. Admission and parking are free this year. However, the Midway is expected to be smaller in size due to the ongoing construction of the new Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre. A few COVID-19 safety measures will also be in place, including temperature checks upon arrival, and masks are recommended to be worn. Exhibition Park CEO Mike Warkentin says there is something for everyone at this year's event.
What people can expect this year is our Midway is back. Finally, after 2 years, Midway is back. Secondly, we've got our Heritage Hall entertainment kicking off on the Gas King stage nightly. Outdoors, we've got the Hickory Street Pigpen patio. Next, we've got our Whoop Up Days Marketplace happening in the main pavilion. And lastly, everybody's favorite from 2019, we've got our food truck alley here behind me. But what I will say to guests, it is a scaled down Midway this year. Part of that is so we can space it out more to give everyone that comfort level, bringing everybody out. With the rising number and some of the surrounding events and some of the challenges that have existed with COVID-19 happening at them, we wanted to be extra precautious as we opened up so that we were sure to deliver Whoop Up Days in a safe and responsible way.
Whoop Up Days runs till midnight Saturday night. The Rocky Mountain Turf Club will be kicking off its fall meet with a day at the races on Sunday to round out the weekend. A new survey says the vast majority of business owners in our province do not support vaccine passports when folks are shopping at their businesses. The study conducted by the Alberta Chambers of Commerce said 67% said no to requiring proof of vaccination to access businesses providing non-essential services. Business owners said the main reason was that vaccination is a personal choice. Of the 28% who supported a vaccination mandate, the rationale was that a coordinated approach to stop COVID-19 transmission is necessary to support business activity. In Lethbridge, of the 460 business owners who were interviewed, 81% were against a proof of vaccine mandate, saying that such an initiative would harm their business. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation released a report which says more than 300,000 federal government employees received pay raises during the COVID-19 pandemic. The CTF's Labor Day reality check report also says that between February of last year and July of this year, there were 149,500 new government jobs, while the private sector lost 395,900 jobs. The report says all MPs received 2 pay raises during the pandemic, ranging from $6,900 to $13,800 for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The CTF report says the federal government has no records of its employees ever receiving a pay cut. Now, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has also been criticizing the Liberal Party's platform in regards to its, quote, runaway spending train. According to the CTF, the Liberal platform does not include a plan to balance the budget. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has predicted budget deficits until the year 2070. Franco Terrazzano is the Federal Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. He joins me now from Ottawa. Now, Franco, you say the Liberal platform includes $78 billion in new spending, even with our national debt at $1 trillion?
It's reckless, right? We're hearing billions of dollars in new spending. So all we're hearing from the Liberals is more borrowing, but not a peep on how and when they're going to balance the budget. And if you look at Trudeau's and the Liberals' track record, right, that comment that budgets balance themselves, the broken promise in 2015 to balance the budget, and with this platform, I think it's a good bet that the Liberals will never balance the budget.
Franco, will all of the spending announcements by the Trudeau Liberals help or hurt them as we head into the federal election September 20th?
Well, I think one thing that Canadians do want is a path back to balance. And I think one of the key issues here in this election is affordability. Well, we have to talk about how the government is increasing the cost of living and how that cost of living will increase if this deficit spending isn't reined in. And we have to remember we're already $1 trillion in debt, which means that each Canadian is on the hook for $29,000 in federal debt alone. And you know what? That bill is only going to increase if we don't see politicians taking a balanced budget seriously.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. You know, with students back in school this week, police across the province are reminding drivers about their driving habits, especially in school zones. The Alberta RCMP offered some tips to help keep our kids safe. Officials say drivers need to slow down when entering a school or playground zone. When a school bus is flashing its alternating red lights to stop and do not pass, failure to do so could result in a $567 fine with 6 demerit points. When pedestrians are crossing, make sure you come to a complete stop and do not block the crosswalk with your vehicle. Always follow the direction of crossing guards, and when it comes to unloading child passengers, do so away from traffic or congestion, but rather in a designated drop-off area. RCMP say they ticketed 160 motorists for speeding in a school or playground zone last year. 47 of those offences were in September alone. Manitoba's new Premier, Kelvin Goertzen, was sworn in after being chosen as interim leader of the governing Tories. Goertzen will serve until a party leadership vote on October 30th. He says he's planning on killing 5 contentious bills so that the next leader can begin with a clean slate.
I know that the role that I have is primarily viewed as one of caretaker. A new premier will be selected for Manitobans in 60 days. But I also know that these are times that will still require significant decisions, and I will rely upon my PC caucus colleagues, a great team of women and men, to assist in these decisions. As it is a caretaker role, Cabinet will continue on in its current composition for a new Premier to make longer-term decisions about the Cabinet when they assume office.
Goertzen is the former Deputy Premier of Manitoba, along with the Minister of Legislative and Public Affairs. Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced that Ontarians will need to be vaccinated against COVID-19 to enter a restaurant, bar, gym, or movie theater beginning on September 22nd. The province will start with paper or digital vaccination receipts and then launch a mobile QR code and app in October.
After in-depth discussions with our medical experts, we've landed on a vaccine certificate policy that is based on evidence and best advice. It's a policy with the following key principles. Vaccinations will be mandatory for certain indoor settings where the risk of transmission is highest because of masks aren't always worn, including restaurants, bars, and casinos, among others. Enforcement will be led by law officers, will be reasonable, and will rely on individuals and businesses to do the right thing.
Relentless rain from the remnants of Hurricane Ida sent the New York City area into a state of emergency on Thursday. Floodwaters cascaded into subways and trapped drivers on the highways. New York's FDR Drive and the Bronx River Parkway were both underwater by late Wednesday evening. A TV crew showed New York firefighters carrying a man to safety from his SUV along the Bronx River Parkway. City officials put a travel ban in place for all non-emergency vehicles due to the massive flooding. From heavy rain to out-of-control wildfires, firefighters reported making some progress in the battle to save communities on the south end of Lake Tahoe from an approaching forest fire. This was after stiff winds and searing temperatures they had feared failed to materialize.
I think we're more optimistic as we're going to start to see these containment lines start to increase. We did have some acreage increase overnight, but it was not significant enough it was expected. The containment lines that are going to increase are going to motivate us even more as we move through. We're going to get out of this wind event today by 11 o'clock tonight. Once that's over, we hope that we have more favorable weather moving forward that will increase the opportunities for containment line percentages to uptick. Yeah, smoke production limits the visibility and limits our capability of using air assets at that time. So we've been fielding that question a lot. Why no fixed wing? Where are the helicopters? And it's just not safe for them to fly in those sorts of conditions. It is a heavy lift for the firefighters on the ground at that point, because then it's all on them to try to fight this fire from the front in these very hard to access areas, but they've done an excellent job as we continue this fight.
A woman in Massachusetts whose 2 sons died 10 years apart from opioid overdoses says she's hopeful that a settlement in the case against OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma will lead to better treatment for those who are addicted to opioids.
February 24th, 2011, I lost my son, Corey, to an overdose. And just recently, I lost my second son, Sean, to an overdose as well. All the money in the world is not going to bring our children back, but it might save someone else's. So we'll take what we can get as far as money to help the opioid crisis now. Could the deal have been better? Yeah, the deal could have been better money-wise, but time-wise, like I said, we lost 93,000 people in 2020. We just don't have time to waste anymore. 250 people are dying every single day.
Purdue Pharma was dissolved on Wednesday, and the bankruptcy settlement will require the company's owners, the Sackler family, to turn over $4.5 billion of their fortune to address the deadly opioid epidemic. An underground church in Afghanistan is facing continued threats of attacks by the Taliban, who are going door to door looking for believers. The director of the Christian-run Middle East Women's Leadership Network is calling for the international community to stand with many Christian women working in the media in Afghanistan.
The fall of Afghanistan has struck terror in women working in the media there, as they fear attacks from the Taliban, who are going door to door looking for them. Shireen Tabor, director of the Christian-run Middle East Women's Leadership Network, says many of the women she's personally trained in media skills are desperately calling for help to flee the country.
We reached out to over 150 Afghans in the last year for our religious freedom film trainings. And for our e-course, we offer an e-course about how to promote human rights, religious freedom, and women's empowerment. And these people are still in contact with us. Just this last 10 days, I heard from 5 women who are media producers and feel threatened because their work is out there in the public. It can be found on YouTube. It may be archived, and they're concerned that the Taliban or extremists will come after them. This morning, I got a letter from a woman who was in one of our documentary films recently, and she's very concerned. She was asking our help to help her leave the country immediately. Now, we're a women's media production network. We don't have the kinds of connections to help people leave immediately. So we've had to reach out to some of our partners who work with government agencies and send them some emails and contacts. It really is not enough. So we need to find strategies to help these women that are still stuck inside the country.
Tabor's calling on the international Christian community to stand with these vulnerable women in prayer and practical support at this difficult time. Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
I have to keep praying for those in Afghanistan, definitely. The leaves are beginning to change color here in southwestern Alberta, and we had a slightly cooler temperature as well. Fortunately, by the weekend, it'll feel more like summer again. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. It may be a good time to consider watering those flowers, trees, and shrubs again. Not a lot of rain in the forecast for the next week or so. Jeanette Rocher is back with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the dry conditions should remain for quite some time in our region.
Yeah, well, that's true. No rain in the foreseeable future anyways. Starting off our WePup days, we're looking at partly cloudy skies this evening. Should be clearing up, though, by the morning, giving us a high of 22 tomorrow for our first full day of WePup days there. Mix of sun and cloud as we head into the long weekend. Sunshine on Saturday, beautiful 25 degrees. Looking at Sunday, 27 with a mix of sun and cloud. And then on Labor Day Monday, 22 with lots of sunshine. Sunshine continuing into next week. Look at those temperatures for Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. 28 degrees, bringing us back up to above the average high for this time of year. So should remain dry, should remain sunny, and fairly decent temperatures coming up to 23, the average high for this time of year. 8 degrees, the average low. Back in 1998, we had our hottest day on record, which was 35. 0 was our lowest back in 1999. Sun rose this morning at 6:48 a.m. and our sunset this evening, 8:13 p.m. So let's take a look at what's happening across the nation, starting on the west coast here. Victoria looking at 20 degrees tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud. Should be increasing cloud a little bit more throughout the day there. 20 degrees in Vancouver, same thing, starting out sunny with increasing clouds by noon. 21 in Edmonton tomorrow under sunny skies. Sunshine tomorrow in Calgary as well with a high of 20 degrees. Should be fairly nice tomorrow across Alberta. Looking to the rest of the prairies, 21 in Saskatoon with the partly cloudy skies. Lots of sunshine in Regina, 22 the high. 23 in Winnipeg with partly cloudy skies. And we're looking at winds of 30 to 50 kilometers per hour there. As we look to the central part of the country, Toronto, we're seeing lots of sunshine as well, 23 the high. Lovely day in both Ottawa and Montreal tomorrow with partly cloudy skies for both, 24 the high in both of those cities. As we look to the east coast, let's take a look at what's happening over in the Maritimes, starting with Fredericton. Fredericton could see some rain tomorrow, 15 degrees the high. Halifax also looking at some showers, 18 degrees the high there. Still expecting some heavy rainfalls this evening in Charlottetown, looking up to the 30 millimeters. And then by tomorrow, chance of showers as well should be tapering off a bit, 19 degrees the high, 22 the high tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland, with a chance of showers as well. So a little bit more showery on the east coast there tomorrow. There you go, that is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you, rain or shine, by the Gym in the North. Top-notch equipment and customized classes in Lethbridge's North End.
Stats Canada says our country's merchandise trade surplus fell to $778 million in July as imports rose more than exports for the month. The result compared with a revised trade surplus of $2.6 billion for June. The July surplus came as total imports rose 4.2% to reach a record high of $53 billion. Total exports rose 0.6% to $53.7 billion, which is another record high as gains in a number of sectors were partially offset by a sharp drop in lumber exports. CIBC has signed a deal to purchase Costco's Canadian credit card portfolio, becoming the exclusive issuer of Costco Mastercards in Canada. The bank says the portfolio comes with over $3 billion in outstanding balances. It says existing Capital One Costco Mastercard holders can continue to use their current card until they receive their new CIBC card expected early next year. Costco has more than 100 warehouses across Canada. As higher shipping fees and labor shortages drive up costs for food manufacturers, the industry is reducing the amount of food in a package as a way to adjust for inflation without raising prices. It is a retail strategy known as shrinkflation, reducing package size to offset rising input costs while keeping prices stable. An original package of Oreo cookies, for example, has shrunk by 3 cookies from 303 to 270 grams. That's roughly a 10% reduction by weight. A bag of Lay's potato chips, which was once 180 grams, is now down to 165. And Quaker granola bars have 5, not 6 bars, and Armstrong cheese is 600 grams rather than 700. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 105 points on the day to finish at 20,795. The Dow was up 131 points to 35,444. The S&P 500 was up 12 points to 4537, and the Nasdaq was up 21 points to 15,331. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.40 to $69.99 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 3 cents to $4.64 US. Gold was down 8 cents to $18.0959 US an ounce, and silver was even at $23.90 US an ounce. Wheat is at $410 per metric ton, barley's at $408, canola's at $8.92, and corn is at $429 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $1.53 to $126.05. Feeder cattle were down $3 to $165.05, and lean hogs were down 30 cents to $89.85. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.67 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Whoop Up Days 2021 has officially kicked off today at Exhibition Park in Lethbridge. This year's festivities include the Midway, food trucks, live entertainment, a handmade market, and so much more. Admission and parking are free this year. However, the Midway is expected to be smaller in size due to the ongoing construction of the new Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center. Former Alberta Wildrose leader Brian Jean has been tearing it up on social media lately. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will explain why in just a moment. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Lethbridge Sport Council's Outdoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Tuesdays at Henderson Lake Park and Thursdays behind Nicholas Sharon Arena from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/rovinggyms. Discover how Lethbridge has played an important military role in the preservation of world peace and security by visiting the Lethbridge Military Museum at the Vimy Ridge Armory at the Lethbridge Airport. The museum is open to the public each Wednesday from noon to 4 p.m. Special arrangements for other days and times can be made by calling 403-892-6531. Admission is free, but donations are gratefully accepted. For information, go to lethbridgemilitarymuseum.org. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Many people in Alberta have been wondering, where's Premier Jason Kenney? Like, where's Waldo? Some political pundits say he's laying low during the federal election so as not to give Justin Trudeau and the Liberals any ammunition or momentum as we head into September 20th and the federal election. To talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Mr. Tyler Dawson. Tyler, it's been weeks since we've actually heard from the Premier and more than months since we heard from Health Minister Tyler Shandro. Even Dr. Dina Hinshaw hasn't said much. COVID-19 case counts have been rising here in the province. Why haven't we been hearing from our leaders here?
Honestly, your guess is as good as anyone. It's been like pretty much complete radio silence. As you alluded to, Jason Kenney hasn't been before the media in public since August 9th. Tyler Shandro, late July. July 28th is the date that sticks in my head. And Dina Hinshaw was last seen on August 13th. So they've been away. The Premier has been on holidays. We're not sure where. But the Premier's office has said he's been in touch with the government, is getting briefings, all that sort of thing. But as you say, the case counts are going up. As of Wednesday, more than 12,000 active cases, about 465 people in hospital, including 107 in intensive care. These are figures that we saw sort of at the start of the third wave and at the end of the third wave, at a time when we were getting briefings pretty much every day, I think, from these folks. So a lot of questions from the New Democrats, from pundits, from even in my social circles. You know, that's a thing that's coming up when I see my friends. Where the heck is everyone? And as you say, a good guess is that they are laying low so as to, not interfere in the election at all. But that perhaps a couple people I've talked to say, that doesn't explain why Tyler Shandro couldn't come out. That doesn't explain why Dina Hinshaw could come out, even if Premier Kenney is trying to lay low. So very strange situation, and a lot of political hay being made from it. But, I think the basic question for the rest of us, is we can see the numbers, but what's the government actually doing, if anything? And, that question remains sort of unanswered at this juncture.
Now let's circle back to Ottawa for just a moment of the federal campaign here, Tyler. We see the federal party leaders making stops all across the country, but not many here in Alberta. Why is our province not on their radar?
It is a really interesting phenomenon. I mean, if you look at 2019, the last time we had this, Alberta was an election issue. The province was an election issue. There were huge issues about Western alienation. There was pipeline politics. There was the tanker bill and the pipeline bill that were C-69 and C-48 that were so controversial at the time. Premier Jason Kenney was campaigning alongside Andrew Scheer when he was here. Trudeau stopped here a couple times. It was, and there were battleground ridings. They all ended up going to the Conservatives, except for one in Edmonton. But Alberta was like this huge factor, it felt like, in the 2019 election. And that doesn't seem to be the case right now. I think in part, it has been in a little bit. When there was some daycare discussion, for example, Trudeau criticized Jason Kenney's government for its negotiations over daycare. So it's come up in like bits and pieces here and there, but it doesn't feel like, we're a priority right now, perhaps. That may change, but for the moment, it's been very, very quiet, at least in terms of what the federal leaders have been up to.
I'm wondering at the same time, maybe the Justin Trudeau Liberals are thinking to themselves, well, forget about Alberta, forget about Saskatchewan. We were shut out last time. And the Tories probably think, well, that's a lock for us anyway. So let's focus in on central Canada, where a lot more of the seats are. heading into the federal election. Tyler, kids are back in school, and our Education Minister, Adriana LaGrange, said the province has a plan in place to help students and teachers feel safe. Now, there will be in-school vaccination programs for students beginning September 7th, and officials will be monitoring cases in our schools?
Yes, that's basically the gist of it. A lot of the critics of the UCP government are saying there should be more done in schools. There's been everything from upgraded ventilation to mask mandates and things like that. So there's been a lot of drama this week about that, with the New Democrats really, really hammering the UCP, saying they're not doing enough to protect students. Lest we all forget, the vaccines are only available for people ages 12 and up, which, if I'm remembering my time in school correctly, is like grade 6 and older.
Right.
So certainly vaccinations are going to be a thing. Students who haven't got them will be able to get them in schools under this program that the province is putting in. But it's been a really a hot topic this week, and it sort of links back to the question, or the first thing we talked about people feeling reassured or not about what the government is doing. So the school thing, big question, and of course everyone is hoping that there aren't going to be outbreaks among school-age students. But certainly, if something like that does happen, I think that will very quickly and very dramatically change the way the government is responding.
The UCP War Room is back in the news, Tyler. It put out a request for tenders for a campaign to change the views in both Eastern Canada and the United States. Officials say it is outreach work that has resumed since it was originally shelved during the start of the pandemic.
During the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, in fact, the War Room was basically shut down, and a lot of its money was sort of redirected to COVID-related advertising. But they're back, and they're going to be coming up with this campaign to sort of target people in Quebec, Ontario, and I think sort of like the northeastern United States, just to sort of boost the Alberta oil and gas industry. So they're looking for a contractor who can provide this with experience in public relations in Quebec in particular, and these other jurisdictions. No price has been attached to this. That'll be sort of up to the bidders apparently to suggest a price for it. But it's just notable that the War Room is firing back up after being pretty much non-existent for the last year and a half, and in large part hasn't made a massive splash, I wouldn't say, since 2019. So I guess we'll see what they come up with this time and whether or not it has any significant impact on views of the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, obviously with the War Room, their big focus are pipelines right now, helping Alberta's economy to recover. Now, speaking of which, Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole has pledged his support for our province's energy sector, Tyler, but Liberal leader Justin Trudeau is proposing $2 billion taxpayers' dollars to help workers transition out of the oil and gas sectors.
One of the big catches on this, I was reading a news story that spoke to the Cold Lake mayor who said, yeah, this money's great, but what if you don't want to leave the oil and gas industry? But that's the gist of it. It's a $2 billion sort of training program to help people upgrade skills, find new skills to transition towards the economy of the future, I suppose. Obviously a policy of interest in large part to Alberta, but also Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador as well, which have quite sizable energy and mining projects. So that is, to refer back to the other thing we talked about, there is something that the federal leaders have been paying a little bit of attention to. So of course, we'll see if the Liberals form government again, what that program might look like, how many people avail themselves of that training, and whether or not the economy actually changes. Oil seems kind of hot right now.
Tyler, Alberta's Finance Minister Travis Toews says thanks to the energy sector bouncing back, Alberta has more revenues, more money coming in. That means our province's $18 billion deficit projected in the February budget will be less than $11 billion, so that's good news.
It is a bit of a shocker, I would say. It turns out that energy royalties and revenues are quite a bit higher than expected. So this came at a fiscal update on Tuesday when Finance Minister Travis Toews, it was the first quarter update, I believe, and looking at some of those projections. And yeah, like $10.5 billion more dollars than we expected, which obviously is a good thing for the deficit hawks among us. And Toews did caution, of course, that it's a bumpy road ahead still. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the pandemic. There are obviously sectors of the economy that are not improving as rapidly. But certainly some good news, I think, from sort of the government finance side of things. Of course, they're still hoping to get spending under control, but also from the economic side of things with the picture looking a little bit brighter than it did a few weeks or months ago.
And many of us here in Alberta who have friends and family in the energy sector thinking, what might have been with Trans Mountain, with Keystone XL, what might have been, even more money coming into the provincial coffers. Tyler, former Wildrose leader Brian Jean went on a recent tear on social media saying Alberta needed its own version of the Saskatchewan Party. Well, we do have the Alberta Party, and they have a new leader. Who is he?
His name's Barry Morishita, and he's the mayor of Brooks, Alberta. So he said basically that he's not going to run again for mayor. Of course, there's a municipal election coming up in, what's it got to be, 6 or 8 weeks at this point. And instead, he's going to take over the helm of the Alberta Party, which has very much been on the sidelines since the 2019 election, mostly leaderless. They've had a few announcements in terms of like shadow budget kind of things, but very, very low profile. And so he's basically said that he wants to, canvass Albertans, have a whole bunch of meetings before going ahead and developing some policy and platforms at a convention that'll happen at some point in the future. And what struck me actually about one of the things he said was that he doesn't want to be an especially political party leader, an especially partisan policy person, especially partisan politician, saying that basically Alberta is very divisive in terms of the New Democrats versus the UCP, and that there's presumably what he's getting at is that there's some room in the middle there for another party to try and make some room. And I don't think he's wrong about that. But it's going to be interesting, I think, to see if he's going to be able to make up some of the ground that the party lost over the last few years.
Do we know what former party leader Stephen Mandel is up to these days? Have we heard?
No, I don't think we have. I'm hoping he's enjoying retirement after a long career in the public sphere.
Absolutely. Now, Tyler, even though Finance Minister Travis Taves and the UCP say that our economy is bouncing back, the NDP, the opposition party, doesn't necessarily agree. They say that the economy is not recovering as fast as the province is making it out, and pointing to some of the unemployment numbers in Calgary, and they're even pushing their own plan to help rebuild the economy.
They've been doing this sort of thing recently where they've been proposing a recovery plan, the NDP recovery plan for Alberta kind of thing. It's an interesting adoption, let's say, of a tactic that Jason Kenney's UCP used back when they first sort of unified and Kenney became the leader. And that's to basically act like they're the government or the government in waiting by coming up with policy programs and things like that. To basically say, hey, look, we have this policy idea. We have this plan for the economy. But as you say, a lot of criticism coming from the NDP, pointing to Calgary in particular, where unemployment is still around 10%, I believe. And they're saying that, indicators are good here and there, but this is not a plan for the whole economy. This does not cover tourism, for example, which is still a lagging sector in the economy. This does not account for new energy needs and green transition and all those other kinds of things. So, there's good news on one hand, and the NDP is basically saying the news could be better.
Tyler, Alberta Health Services say staff will be required to be vaccinated. Those who do not get vaccinated will be placed on unpaid leave. Now, that includes contracted lab employees, not just nurses and doctors. Tell me more.
AHS made this announcement on Tuesday evening, and of course, this has been sort of a fraught issue in many sectors, and maybe notably during the federal campaign when Justin Trudeau said that federal public servants are going to need to be vaccinated. Of course, federal public servant, not necessarily, someone in the healthcare sector. So the announcement itself is not unusual, let's say, in the healthcare sector. Quite often, nurses and things like that are not specifically required to get influenza vaccinations, but strongly encouraged, and they might be found other duties if they don't. They do have to have vaccinations for things like hepatitis and other inoculations. So in that sense, not super, super controversial, but certainly an update from AHS on what is going to happen with healthcare workers, both the ones sort of employed directly and these contracted employees. So just a little bit of news on that front, I think, at a time when a lot of people are thinking a lot about vaccine passports and vaccinations and things like that.
Tyler, it's back to school time for a lot of our kids across the province here, and let's talk about the new curriculum as well. Is Education Minister Adriana LaGrange still feeling some of the pressure from the opposition?
She is, and maybe more notably, she's actually got a little bit of blowback from within her own party. So Tracy Allard spoke up and wrote a letter to LaGrange about a week and a half ago now, and basically said there's been so little uptake of this curriculum by school boards that we can't really test it properly. We need to slow this down. We need to reconsult. And the government, of course, is saying that, look, this is a draft platform or a draft curriculum. We're going to put it in, get feedback, and go from there. And LaGrange and Tracy Allard is basically saying we haven't even got to that point. You don't have enough buy-in on this at this point to even say you're going to get a proper go of it. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds in the places where it is being taught. But yeah, again, an issue that I think we can expect to hear more about in the coming weeks.
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks again for your time today.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
Well, some Canadians think that religion is helpful for the country, but there are others who would disagree. But how many of us believe that religion is something that's actually important to Canada's economy? Well, today's guest says that that is exactly the case. I'm joined by Dr. Brian Grimm. He holds a doctorate in quantitative sociology and is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. He's one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between religious freedom and the economy, and is also the author of a recent paper entitled The Hidden Economy: How Faith Helps Fuel Canada's GDP. That is a mouthful. Dr. Brian Grimm, thanks so much for being with us today. Welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you.
So can you first of all tell us a bit about what your organization does?
Yeah, so we're a private foundation, public foundation, non-religious foundation that helps businesses see that religious freedom for everyone, including people that don't have a religion, is good for economies and good for business, and then helps businesses promote a more diverse, religiously diverse and inclusive workforce for their own companies. So we both produce studies, but also work with companies directly to help them become more religiously friendly or religiously inclusive, however you might like to phrase it.
Now, your study estimates the economic value of religion to Canadian society at about $30 billion annually. And I think the mid-range was estimated at around $67 billion, and the high-end estimate puts it at an astounding $690 billion. So can you explain how you go about finding that out, and what do those numbers even mean?
Yeah, well, the high number is just one that takes into account the sort of spending power of religiously affiliated Canadians. So that's just a reference number. That's what their household income is. The households of families that are religious have that much spending power. So that's not really the one we focus on. The middle range is the one that we do focus on. And just to put that in context, that would the religious economy of Canada would make it a larger economy than 110 countries in the world. So it would be like the 72nd largest economy in the world if you think of national GDP. So that's no small number. The way we go about it is looking first at the receipts and the amount of money coming into congregations of all sorts, Christian, Muslims, Jewish, all the different faith congregations, and then look at how they spend that money. So if you think about that, that's money. People usually think that's money coming in, they spend on themselves, but it's actually fueling economies because you pay salaries, either it's clergy or groundskeepers. You pay, especially in Canada, for snow removal, from parking lots. They pay for lights, heating, electricity. But more than that, then we look at what is the value of what they do for society. So more than faith congregations are more than just organizations that tend to their own flocks, but they provide daycare, they provide services for people with addiction, they provide community gathering places, and all of that has economic value. So we calculate that up. We also look at faith institutions like hospitals, universities, as well as faith-related businesses, and that comes to that total.
It's interesting that you say business, because when you first were explaining it, it sounds almost like a business model. But, then again, you get into how they help people. So there are some who might say that while religious organizations provide help for less fortunate, it doesn't actually translate into real dollars for the economy. But where do you see direct benefits to the economy? You mentioned educational.
Well, yeah. So, one is the direct spending. It's just money coming in and going out. That money doesn't just come into a collection plate and stay there and bury it under a mattress. It gets spent on community service and various program salaries, like I mentioned. The other is that some of the programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, if there wouldn't be faith congregations, almost half of them in Canada would have no place to meet. And so those have a spiritual aspect to them. Churches and other congregations open their doors to these. And we estimate that saves, hundreds of lives every year. And that's, if you count the loss of a life, statisticians count that as millions and millions of dollars for every premature death in terms of cost to the system, cost in lost wages, cost to families. So it's in some ways measuring the benefit is measuring the good that they do that prevents harm coming to people, such as addiction.
That's interesting. You also note that much of our healthcare comes from religious organizations. So can you explain this?
Well, so in Canada, of course, much of the education and healthcare systems came often from the Catholic Church. So the foundations of many of even education and healthcare in Canada, most of it has religious roots. Now, these days, most of the hospitals and schools have, especially hospitals, have become nationalized. But in the background, you have that. But there are significant numbers of private faith-based hospitals, educational institutions, and schools. And one thing I'd say, even though the schools, many of them are Catholic schools or other Christian schools, they still get some tax dollars supporting them. But that whole foundation of education and what they're providing is there because of their faith connection. So you walk into a faith-based school, and immediately you see that this is something different. Kids are going to, a church service or a mass, and they're getting different kinds of teaching. So for someone to say, well, it's, that's not significant. Actually, it is a tremendous contribution that religion continues to make to Canadian society.
So how would you respond to those who would argue that religion causes more problems than it's worth in Canada, especially when we're looking at some of the sex abuse scandals associated with religious leaders? And now, of course, the residential school atrocities are a huge focus, and then violent extremism. So how do you respond to that?
Well, certainly, religion can be one of the greatest sources of hope and goodness in the world. And it can also be, when misused, one of the greatest sources of hurt and tragedy in the world. So not to whitewash those problems, those are serious problems. One of the ways that we see in a society like Canada is that religious freedom provides a framework for dealing with times when religion falls short of its ideals or commits crimes even. So that religious freedom allows sort of, you could say, a competitive marketplace, again, going back to an economic analogy, that, if one church or one denomination or one faith group is guilty of some atrocity, society itself comes in and challenges that. And rather than criminalizing religion, it goes after criminal activities that may have happened within a religion. So I think that in the free market economy, when you include that to include religious freedom, freedom itself provides those checks and balances for things that, like anything, just like the internet, it's good, but there's also a dark side. So that check and balance that we have in free societies, I think, is one of the greatest assets to deal with the negative side of religion.
Now, you mentioned religious freedom. So we've seen more restrictions on those religious freedoms recently in Western nations like the UK and the US, and right here in Canada. Is this currently, or will this at some point impact our economy negatively?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So just to use a current example, many of the immigrants coming into Canada, sort of fueling the next generation of innovation, come from countries where religion is central to their identities. And so if these folks come into Canada, whether they're Muslims or Sikhs or Hindus or Christians from from the global South or from the Middle East, if they don't feel that they're free to be their whole self, be that authentic self that faith is such an important part of, they're not going to feel like they can buy into the Canadian, project, so to speak. So that religious freedom's important for new immigrants, just as it is for other people in society. So when you feel like your faith, which for many people is a central part of their life, not everyone, but for those that it is, they don't go to work and think I'm just here to make money. They go to work, many for a purpose to glorify God. And so in that kind of thinking, that if they don't feel that they have religious freedom, that innovative, sort of spirit that says we're gonna work hard and make our country great, it gets diminished.
Right. Now, by the way, is faith on the decline in Canada overall, or is it increasing?
So overall, I mean, the faith has been on the decline in Canada, looking at census data. But faith is resilient in that there was a theory of secularization, that secularization would eventually drive religion out and just be sort of living in a few souls. But that's not really what has happened. So many of the people in Canada who are devoutly faithful continue to be. And one of the sort of secrets is that people who are more religious tend to have more kids, and then they raise more kids. So sort of built into this religious change that's happening is also what's going to happen in the next generations. First, you have the immigration coming in where people are much more religious. Second, immigrants that even aren't religious, like Chinese coming in from mainland China. I think I saw a statistic that half of them become Christians once they come to Canada. So, religion is not something that's just, sort of locked in walls, in a church or, a mosque or a synagogue. It's something's living and active. And so, I expect the religious makeup of Canada to continue to change, grow in different ways in the years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. And then what about in the US? Do you see differences between Canada and the US overall, where faith is either on the rise or the decline?
The U.S., of course, tends to be a bit more religious and actively religious, more public religion in the United States. There's also been a similar decline, and sociologists have different explanations. One that I think makes sense to me is that religion has become very political in the United States. So it becomes a hot button issue. If you're following the news, the U.S. Catholic bishops are, debating whether or not Joe Biden should be allowed to take communion, receive the Eucharist, and that's political. So and Joe Biden's response was, well, for me, my faith is not politics. My faith is what sustains my soul. So I think that the question of the future of American religion is wrapped up in the degree to which faith can sort of reclaim that soulful ground rather than a political ground. And I think that will bring more people interested in faith. But when it becomes political, it becomes divisive, and that doesn't really bode well for the future of religious growth.
Yeah, it just seems like everything these days are becoming so political. It's ridiculous. We don't have very much time left, but really quick, there are occasional arguments that if religious organizations can help restore the family unit, it could greatly reduce addiction problems, depression, gang violence, crime, which would end up saving the government and our economy huge amounts of revenue. So any thoughts on that real quick?
Oh, yeah. So, what we find is that faith is a characteristic of many stable families. You can have a stable family and they don't have religion at all, but the data overwhelmingly show that where you have a more religiously active and involved family, they tend to have more longevity and a stronger family. When you have families, that's one of the most important resources for people facing addiction and other kinds of problems. Because we've done a lot of work with studying Alcoholics Anonymous and these other programs, and you can see such a difference between those who are addicted in these programs who have family support versus those who don't. And as they say in AA, you're either institutionalized, dead, or you're following the AA program. That's one of their slogans. And you really see that when people don't have that family support, they tend to either get incarcerated or overdosing as well. So family is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Grimm. We appreciate having you on.
That's great, and glad to be with you today.
Absolutely. Dr. Brian Grimm is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and the author of a recent paper entitled The Hidden Economy, How Faith Helps Fuel Canada's GDP. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.